Last time I taught this, it was Veterans Day, so we had a Veterans Day intro. You guys, so today I'm going to talk about foreign policy. This is not a one-day lecture. However, in this class it is. And you'll find that in this class, there's a ton of things that I've talked about in one day that would be an entire class. This is a survey of American federal government. I'm doing my best, all right? So you guys help me out, okay? So, you ready? Let's talk about foreign policy. For the first 150 years of our history, our foreign policy was isolationist. This is because of George Washington, right? George Washington, in his farewell address, says, "Beware of entangling alliances with European powers." He says, in other words, let's not get into treaties where we have to defend their interests. And we didn't for 150 years. Now, there were blips in this, of course. The United States certainly did not stay out of other people's business. South America, we hung out there and did stuff. We sent our fleet around the world. Hello, Philippines. There's World War I, which we entered into. Okay? After World War I, Woodrow Wilson is president of the United States, and he goes to Europe and he says, "Hey, here's the deal. That war was awful. Let's not do it again." And everybody said, "Yeah, you think it was bad for you? It was worse for us." And he's like, "Well, obviously." And he says, "Let's together form a League of Nations." And European nations say, "Good idea. Can we wear capes?" He says, "Of course." He goes back to the Senate. The Senate of the United States says, "We're isolationists. Veto." They do not approve the League of Nations. So, the League of Nations does not have American support. Following World War I, we have the Treaty of, anyone? Versailles? Okay, Versailles. Versailles was an amazing treaty that certainly stopped war on the continent, right? No, it was bad, right? It was really bad. It punished Germany very much. And as a result of this, the German people suffered, and so the German people were particularly susceptible to demagogues and the rise of fascism. What's a demagogue? We've learned this. What's a demagogue?
Someone who gets people riled up and angry.
Someone who gets people riled up and angry, and basically based on emotion rises to power. Fear is usually the thing. It's really good to aim it at a particular group of people. Okay? If you can aim it at a group of people, right, then you can say it's all their fault. Right? I mean, Hitler was really good at this too. I mean, he was like, "Hey, you're blonde and blue-eyed and fast and strong and smart, aren't you?" And they're like, "Yeah." And they're like, "So it's not your fault that this is happening. It's the Jewish people's fault." And they're like, "Yeah, we didn't do it. We're smart and strong and blonde and blue-eyed." He said, "Yeah." He said, "Look, I'm not even that. You're so much prettier than I am." Oh, we are, thank you. And stronger and faster, don't forget. People were flattered, and they were given a scapegoat. Okay? This is how demagogues work. We have the rise of fascism throughout Europe. I mean, we see it everywhere. We see kind of the inklings of fascism in the United States, Great Britain. Mussolini in Italy perfects fascism. What is fascism? Colin, what's fascism? Fascism? You said, I thought maybe you said, okay. Fascism?
It's a right-wing authoritarian ideology that focuses on the collective over the individual.
Right-wing authoritarian ideology that focuses on the collective over the individual, controls all aspects of society and the economy. Okay? The main difference between fascism and totalitarian communism is that under totalitarian communism, the means of production are owned by the people and dispersed to the people. And under fascism, they're owned by the state and dispersed to the people closest to the top of the state, more oligarchical. Make sense? Okay, fascism. So this rise of fascism leads to World War II. This happens under 30 years from the end of World War I. And understand, have you guys watched anything on World War I? What have you watched? I heard somebody say yeah. Yeah? What? What'd you see? Yeah.
I saw like the effects they had on soldiers.
What?
The effects that they had on the soldiers. There was this one said that they couldn't just, like he was like in
The effects it had on soldiers, and part of it was the gas, right? The way that unrestrained chemical warfare, yeah? Sure. So we have like the British who are like, they believe one good charge will break the German ranks, right? And so they're on horses. And they're being mowed down by, you know, machine guns. War horse, right? You want to watch something that will rip your heart out? That will do it. We do see a lot of advances in medical science due to war. We see that from the Civil War. We see that from World War I, World War II. No question. Yeah?
A lot of different kinds of war crimes. Like gases, shotguns,
Yeah, so a lot of war crimes, absolutely, in World War I, which aren't a such thing yet. Right? There's no such thing yet.
A lot of governments are toppled, like the Russian Empire, the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
We see a lot of things happening to old-time empires that are fragmented as a result of World War I.
There were ones they had like trenches.
Trench warfare, right? So, actually, where's Conley? There you are, Conley. I just showed Conley a clip from some trench warfare, but that was World War II. It was actually comedic, so, you know. Well, if you guys want to see it, I'll show it to you at some other point. Come by my office. I have funny things on my computer. All right. So, the United Nations, we have World War II that breaks out as a result of this, okay? This rise of fascism, okay? Germany is suppressed. Adolf Hitler is marshaling. Hitler is a strong man. Mussolini is a strong man. Franco in Spain is a strong man. Together with the emperor in Japan, okay? Hirohito, okay? They're going to form together and be known as the Axis. All right? The Allies, who are made up of who? Who are the Allies?
United States, USSR, UK, China, like the others.
And France, right? These are the big five, okay? You guys ready? This is important. The United States, the USSR, China, Germany, France. No, sorry, not Germany. Britain and France, sorry. So, those are the Allies, okay? So UK, United Kingdom, and France. These are the five. This matters because they win. It matters because they win. And they shape the world afterwards. They form the United Nations, and part of the United Nations has a Security Council for global security. Who sits on the Security Council? Who are the permanent members of the Security Council?
Pretty much the Allies.
The Allies.
The USSR, which became Russia.
USSR becomes Russia, and also China, right, which we have a communist revolution in China. And so initially,
It was the People's Republic of China.
Taiwan has the power, and then China, after the 1970s, takes that seat. Okay? But this matters, because the United Nations cannot take any action in collective security if the Security Council doesn't okay it. Which means these five all have a permanent veto. Nobody else has a veto. Who are they again? United States, Russia, China, France, the UK, United Kingdom, Great Britain. Okay? Following World War II, it's very quickly apparent that Stalin is marshaling forces in the East. Okay? Germany's divided up. The USSR is supposed to administer one quarter. They stop letting people in. As Winston Churchill very famously says, it's like an iron curtain has descended over Europe, completely blocking the East from the West. We have the Berlin Wall that goes up, right? And we have access to Germany severed. Germany becomes essentially two different states, East and West. So, and part of this too is that the USSR creates something called the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact are all the nations on the east side of that curtain, and the USSR, but not China. China says, hey, we really don't want anything to do with this. We're just going to hang out here by ourselves. Leave us alone. We've got our own revolution to deal with. We're going to redo communism our way. Leave us alone. Okay? In response to the Warsaw Pact, NATO is formed. NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization, right? NATO. Okay? So we have NATO that's formed. Okay? And the United States, under Truman, begins a foreign policy called containment. What's the point of containment? Stop the spread of communism. Okay, now this is a point that I need to make clear to you guys, that you will forget, but I want you to remember, okay? When we talk about stopping the spread of communism, this was what we used in the vernacular, but we need to understand that it's not a very accurate term. Okay? We were talking about stopping the spread of authoritarian communist states. But communism itself is not a form of government. It is what? An economic system? That's what he said. He said economic system. All right. It's an economic system, okay? So what are the economic systems? There's communism. What else? Capitalism, good, excellent. Socialism, what else? We have some mixed systems. The United States is actually a mixed system, all right? These are economic systems. This has to do with the degree of control the government has over the means of production, okay? How much the government owns. That's one thing. This is the other thing. Forms of government, okay? So forms of government include, what's our favorite? Democracy. We have democracy and republics, right? Those go together. What else do we have?
Good old monarchy.
Monarchies, excellent. Autocracies, okay? Autocracy, totalitarianism, these dictatorships, all the same thing, okay? It's just a question of whether we have a few people in charge or one person in charge, right? But it talks about the structure of government that is distinct from the way that we've structured our economic system. Make sense? So when we talked about stopping the spread of communism, containment, we were talking about absolutely stopping the spread of the economic system of communism, the state owning all the means of production. Yes. But more significantly, we are talking about stopping the spread of totalitarian governments. Okay? So, that's what we were talking about. Which is not to say that we were consistent, but this is what our proposed foreign policy was about. Truman Doctrine. The world is created then into a bipolar power structure. We have the East and the West, the first and second world, and everything else is called the third world. Okay? We don't call those things that anymore, except for me, who occasionally says, well, you know, in the third world, or first world problems. We make those comments because that was our vernacular for a while, right? But the first world is the West, and the second world is the East. And we have two competing bipolar structures, two major superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, right? And they have the countries that are their allies. NATO, the Warsaw Pact. And China's hanging over here saying, leave us alone. Okay? During this period of time, we developed nuclear weapons. The United States is the only country that has ever successfully used nuclear weapons on another country. We did it twice. We bombed Japan twice. We dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan. Why did we drop 2? Because after 1, they said, surrender, we're willing to surrender.
Because they wanted terms, they wanted substitution, and we wanted an unconditional.
Number 1, we wanted an unconditional surrender. Okay? But there's a second, more long-range reason for it, too. To intimidate everybody. Because if you drop 1, they think you only have 1. But if you drop 2, it proves you have as many as you can make. Okay? Because if you only had 2, you would still keep 1. Right?
Didn't we only have 2?
I think we had like 4 at the time. So, but capability, right? What happens as a result is very quickly the Soviet Union develops nuclear capability as well. We share our nuclear capability with Great Britain and France. Okay? China independently develops as well. By treaty, these are the only 5 countries allowed to have nuclear weapons. Are they the only 5 countries that have nuclear weapons? No, they are not. Who else has nuclear weapons? Iran? Who else? Iran actually nuclear power. They don't actually have weapons. Pakistan? Yes. Who else? North Korea? India? Israel. Right? Okay. There we go. Okay? But the idea is essentially this. The United States right now continues to have nuclear air-to-surface or ground-to-surface missiles that are in silos, you know, here in Oklahoma and in Kansas and in Nebraska, across the Dakotas, that can be launched and destroy strategic points in Russia. They're there. They exist. We still have a nuclear arsenal in our planes and in our submarines. Okay? Russia developed a very similar set of nuclear weapons. And as a result, we had something called mutually assured destruction. Who's watched Dr. Strangelove? no one, you have something you have to do this weekend, watch Dr. Strangelove. I promise you, some of you will enjoy it.
For extra credit.
Huh?
For extra credit.
Extra credit, maybe extra credit. I can do that. I can do that for extra credit. Dr. Strangelove, extra credit. Okay. But the idea behind mutually assured destruction is essentially this. If one of us launches nuclear weapons, who dies? Everybody dies. Right? And so we say, hey, that's not such a great idea. We will rattle our sabers, and then we will walk away. Okay? We're everybody dies. We fight a number of proxy wars under containment. Korea being one of them. Vietnam being the most significant and bloody one for the United States. After that, we let other people fight instead of us. And as a result of Vietnam, we moved from this more aggressive policy that we had under the Truman Doctrine. We followed through Eisenhower, Kennedy. And so under Nixon, we moved to something called détente. What is détente? You guys who are French class? Anyone? Yes. An easing of tensions, right? It means relax and easing of tensions. Détente. But something happens, all right? We're kind of talking, things are going a little bit better. And in 1980, President Reagan runs for office. And he runs, and this is my advice to you, should you run for president, run on 3 things. Not these 3 things necessarily, right? Gauge your time. But 3 is good, because 3 you can deliver on, okay? Eric?
Yes.
I know that I want you to be a force for good in the world, so I'm trying. But 3, okay? 3 things. Reagan runs on, number 1, states' rights. We talked about that during civil rights. Number 2, lower taxes. Number 3, destroy the evil empire. Who's the evil empire? The USSR. That is correct, the Soviet Union. And so we ramp up our military spending. We increase it massively. Not necessarily, I mean, the military personnel don't necessarily feel it, though we have a decent presence. We continue to have a big presence. They don't feel it raises necessarily, but what they do feel it is this. We replace Jeeps with Humvees. We increase our technological input in terms of our fighter planes, right? We increase the amount of, toys we have. That's what happens, all right? And so we're spending all this money, and so in the Soviet Union, what happens? They do the same thing. They said, oh crap, they're spending an awful lot of money, we need more too, right? And so they spend more money, and what happens is, remember how I told you how No Child Left Behind, we found out in Texas, the books were cooked? Same thing. The books were cooked. The Soviet Union didn't have that kind of money. They were not doing well. And so they were spent into collapse because they could not continue to provide services to their people. They could not maintain their economy and try to fight this Cold War.
That's pretty bad.
So here we have this bipolar world. Over here, on the right or left, whichever you prefer, is the United States and its allies. As the superpower, the United States is superpower, the Soviet Union, the other superpower, and its allies. Okay? Following the end of the Cold War, the United States is the only remaining superpower. This remains true. So, we start using multilateralism. Let's draw down a bit. We don't have to be so big anymore. Let's work together with our allies. We work really well with our NATO allies in a number of ways. Kuwait in the Gulf War in 1990, for example, that's a UN exercise, right? because Iraq attacks Kuwait, and Kuwait is a member of the United Nations, right? But then we have things like Serbian aggression, war in the Balkans, we have Bosnia in 1995, we had Kosovo in 1999. This is when my husband is in the Marines, and he will tell you some stories that you do not want to hear. But the point is that during this period of time, we're seeing small regional conflicts that result in genocide. Same thing, we see the same thing going on in Rwanda. Okay? And so what had been kind of holding the stability of the system together, this bipolar world, had collapsed. And so a lot of countries that were forced together by the Soviet Union, for example, Czechoslovakia, they said, hey, so we're going to go back to being the Czech Republic. And Slovakia said, that's cool, we're going to go back to being Slovakia. And they split and it was nothing. That's not what happened everywhere else. Okay? A lot of people with competing cultures had been kind of forced together by the Cold War. We also have something else happen. In 1993, we have the first World Trade Center bombing by Al-Qaeda in 1993. It was unsuccessful. In the basement, rather than with airplanes. And when President Clinton goes out of office, he says to President George W. Bush, who's incoming, look, the number one threat we have to national security is Al-Qaeda. Nine months later, Al-Qaeda hits on 9/11, the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And the United States, in terms of the way the world sees us, is incredibly supported. Everybody is behind us. Okay? And we lead a multinational invasion of Afghanistan to out the Taliban. We were not prepared before 9/11 to deal with issues in the Middle East, to deal with terrorism. We had too few linguists, not enough focus on the threat of terrorism. The war on terrorism is aimed at groups versus nations, and so, it's difficult to say where the lines are, right? You hit the Capitol, you hit a military target, that makes sense. It's much more difficult when we're talking about groups of people. We have a lack of defined battlefronts. The Iraq War, we go into Iraq shortly thereafter. George W. Bush claims that there are weapons of mass destruction. That's the rationale. There were no weapons of mass destruction other than ones that we gave them in the 1980s. And so we did not have the same sort of support for this war. The evidence was flimsy. It's a real problem because there's strong international objection. People are not with us. And it was difficult because we had a war going on in Afghanistan. And we had not really, yes, we'd taken over, but we hadn't really solidified that. And so in Iraq, which did not have Al-Qaeda, which had gotten rid of Al-Qaeda years before, we go and fight a different war. We leave Afghanistan less protected. And post-war Iraq has become very unstable. And it limited our ability to respond on other fronts. The Taliban is going to slowly reassert control in Afghanistan. Pakistan was used as a safe haven for the Taliban. And Pakistan's our ally-ish.
Depends on the day.
We're friendly, we're friends, right? But we capture Osama bin Laden under President Obama, yeah?
Talking about the war in Afghanistan, most nearly everybody in here was born after it started.
Yeah, we've been at war your entire lives until last August. Think about that.
Yeah. And look how well that went.
We have a surge, an Afghan surge, where we say, hey, we're going to fix this. And we go in with more military, then we draw down the troops. President Trump is elected, and President Trump is elected saying that he is going to leave, get us out of Afghanistan immediately, right? At the same time, this is going on in the Arab world. In 2011, we see the Arab Spring, the rising of democracy. This has nothing to do with us, right? And this is one of the things we do, actually, pretty decently, is we promote democracy around the world, right? We play rock and roll, generally. We play Voice of America, Radio Free Europe. We're good at that propaganda. We give chocolate bars. You think it helps, all right? Our economy was gangbusters in the 1950s and 60s because we're rebuilding. By the way, just so you guys know, who's our best friend in the world? Great Britain. Without question. BFFs forever. Okay? But who's number 2 and 3?
Germany and France.
Germany, not France. France is our frenemy. Okay? Who's our other one? Germany and who else?
Canada.
Canada. Meh.
Oh, come on. Canada.
It's not Canada.
Japan.
It's Japan.
Yeah, take that.
The 2 big Axis powers, Germany and Japan, because we rebuild them in the 1950s, according to their own culture, help them establish democratic forms of government. Okay? Japanese democracy is not like U.S. democracy, and neither is German. Okay. Fine, Canada, we're friends. We're not unfriends. We just don't see them as, you know, equal. So it's kind of like a big brother, big sister thing, you know, sort of thing. Yeah, okay. All right. So we are caught off guard by the scale of this uprisings, and so we try to do stuff to help. But everything that we do is military. U.S. and NATO try to intervene in Libya. We try to intervene in the Syrian civil war. And we have the rise of ISIS, the Islamic State, in Syria and Libya during that time. So what's going on today? This is kind of the big debate, right? We have President Trump. His argument was, we put America first. We get out of Afghanistan. We close down our borders. We stop trade. We put in tariffs. Okay? The idea is we strengthen America by stop being involved in other places, right? This is a very popular idea. It sounds a lot like what? Isolationism. Absolutely. So we withdraw from the TPP, from NAFTA. We implement tariffs. We start a trade war with China. We ban and we have a travel ban. We stop DACA. What's that?
Dreamers Act.
What's DACA? Okay, so when children are brought as minors to the United States, they're given some amnesty to be able to seek citizenship. Okay? And so they're able to seek citizenship. They're not deported. I said exported earlier. I don't know what that was. They're not deported, but that's going to be stopped. That was an executive order under Obama. Okay? That's going to be stopped by Trump. He builds about 2.6 miles of wall. There are 3,000 children removed from their parents at the border, and we cap our refugee cap at the lowest it's ever been. So political refugees. In the Middle East, there's promises to leave Afghanistan, and a deal is struck. Okay? But removal does not happen. We have strikes in Syria. We leave the Iran nuclear deal. We give a lot of support to Saudi Arabia. We have drone strikes against IS leaders and an Iranian leader. We also block military aid to Ukraine. We leave the United Nations Human Rights Council. We snub also our best friends forever, the NATO and Western leaders. We're going to have really stronger friendship with Putin and Kim Jong-un. We withdraw from the World Health Organization. COVID-19 hits, global problems. We leave the Open Skies Agreement. And we also, as far as the environment is concerned, we leave the Paris Agreement. President Biden has changed a lot of these policies. We've gone back to what we were doing before. And understand, this is important for you to note, okay? President Trump was not behaving as Republican presidents before him had behaved in terms of international foreign policy, all right? This was distinct, and I want to be clear about that. Biden goes back to what we were doing under both Democratic and Republican presidents, okay? Truman Doctrine, maybe. I mean, that might be where we are. Rebuilding trade alliances. DACA is back on. Children are reunified at the border. We re-enter the Iran deal. We withdraw all troops from Afghanistan. We provide military and economic aid to Ukraine. We're back in the United Nations Human Rights Council, the World Health Organization, Open Skies, and Russia removes their diplomats from the United States because we are investigating them for what? Espionage? Sure, they're always doing that. But what's the big investigation? Elections, right? Meddling in our elections. And then we rejoin the Paris Agreement.
Can we take attendance?
Oh yeah, take attendance, that'd be great. Eric is going to take attendance, and I'm going to show you where we are in the world today. The big shift in the way that the world views us. The question asked is, do you have confidence in the U.S. president to do the right thing regarding world affairs? There's a significant swing in international confidence in the United States. At the same time, we need to talk about the military and our nuclear war capabilities. One of the things with nuclear war and nukes generally is this. We use it as a deterrence policy. The idea is we say, hey look, we've got these weapons, don't be dumb, right? Deterrence, okay? Mutually assured destruction because we have a nuclear triad of land, air, and sea, okay? In other words, the silos that are in Kansas, our bomber jets, and our submarines are all equipped with nuclear weapons, okay? Russia inherited the Soviet Union and took all the ones that were in Ukraine, for example, and they moved them out. Anything that was outlined, they moved them into Russia, okay? But there's a real question. Has Russia been able to maintain this arsenal? Because you have to maintain a nuclear arsenal because it does what? It degrades. And then it's not useful, right? So that's a question. Our biggest threat after the Cold War was over was the threat of a rogue nation or terrorist group getting a hold of a nuclear weapon, a suitcase bomb, right? Only a select number of countries are allowed to have nuclear weapons under treaty law, as we discussed. In terms of conventional war, he just went to the bathroom. Okay. In terms of conventional war, we have U.S. capability. Eric is going to take attendance again. He is feeling punitive today. Conventional war. Our U.S. capability is essentially this. We can fight 2 medium-sized wars simultaneously. Okay? It's when we get to 3 fronts that it becomes more difficult. We have highly advanced weapon systems, and we have an all-volunteer military. This matters, okay? And by volunteer, I don't mean you don't get paid, right? As my husband always says, when someone thanks him for his service, he says, well, they paid me, right? But the point is is you choose to do it, right? As opposed to being drafted. Okay? As opposed to being drafted. And so in Vietnam, the big outcry we had against war was that people were sent to war who didn't want to be there. Okay? In 2012, we have a restructuring of the military. We pulled the focus away from Europe. We changed the training element. Have we maybe refocused on Europe lately? Yeah. Unconventional or guerrilla war is a whole other thing. Attacks and tactics mean attacks on civilian populations. Tactics are people who are not dressed as military, you know. We talk about winning the hearts and minds. We did an amazing job of that with the Marshall Plan after World War II. Since then, we have not been as good at that one. Rock and roll still works, okay? U.S. military struggles to adapt to this, but recent reforms have been to try to make the military better, more adept at this, being able to fight in cities and deal with threats that are not in uniform. This is how we spend our money. In billion U.S. dollars, we spend $778 billion. The next closest is China, who spends a third of what we spend. This is maybe a better graph. The United States spends $610 billion here. This was before, this was a different year. This was 2017, okay? As compared to China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, India, France, United Kingdom, and Japan. If we look at this, okay, we have here too the United States, along with Germany, France, Japan, and Britain, really close friends, okay, are going to be spending about 54% as compared to everybody else. So, I've already asked you guys this question, but it's been a month, and so you've had time to think about it. So I'm going to ask you again. Should we aid? Because remember, public opinion is at a point in time. And public opinion matters.